She wasn't born into royalty. She didn't come with riches, armies, or power. Just an orphan, raised in exile. A foreign girl living under the rule of the world's most powerful empire. Yet she was chosen, not by chance, not by beauty alone. She was positioned by divine purpose, hidden behind palace walls for such a time as this. But while kings drank from golden cups and nobles plotted in secret, a quiet battle was brewing, one that wouldn't be fought with swords or chariots, but with fasting, faith, and the bravery to speak when silence could mean death. Her name was Esther, and this isn't just the story of a queen. It's the story of how God saved a people through the most unlikely of heroes. In the days of King Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, his power stretched across the known world. From his throne in Susa, he reigned with absolute authority. To display his greatness, Xerxes held a lavish feast for 180 days, inviting nobles, princes, and military leaders from across the empire. Gold goblets and royal wine flowed freely. When those 6 months ended, the king opened the palace gates to everyone in Susa, hosting a 7-day banquet in the garden courtyard. Wine was served generously, with no restrictions. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti hosted a separate feast for the women inside the palace. But on the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he made a prideful demand: that Queen Vashti be brought before the guests wearing her royal crown so they could admire her beauty. Vashti refused. She would not parade herself before a drunken crowd. The king's pride was wounded. His own queen had publicly defied him. Enraged and humiliated, Xerxes turned to his wise men. One advisor, Memucan, warned that her defiance would spread. He said, "All women will hear of this and dishonor their husbands." They urged the king to remove Vashti and issue a decree throughout the empire that every man should rule his own household. The king agreed. A royal edict was sent to every province in every language, and Queen Vashti was dethroned. But little did they know, God's unseen hand had just begun to move. As time passed, King Xerxes' anger faded, and he began to reflect on Queen Vashti, her beauty, her bold defiance, and the decree that banished her. Though the law could not be undone, her absence lingered. Sensing the king's mood, his advisors proposed a solution. Let beautiful young virgins be brought from every province. After beauty treatments, the king can choose a new queen to replace Vashti. The king agreed. Messengers were sent across all 127 provinces, and young women were gathered from every corner of the empire, from India to Ethiopia. Among them was Hadassah, known by her Persian name Esther, a young Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, a Jew living in Susa. He had taught her to fear God and keep her identity hidden in a foreign land. Esther was taken to the palace and placed under Haggai, the keeper of the women. Immediately, she stood out, not by demanding luxury, but through humility and grace. God gave her favor in everyone's eyes, especially Haggai's. For 12 months, Esther, like all the women, was prepared for her one appearance before the king. When her time came, she entered the king's presence with quiet dignity and strength. And when Xerxes saw her, he was captivated. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won his favor, and he placed the royal crown on her head, making her queen in place of Vashti. A royal banquet was held in her honor, a holiday was proclaimed, and gifts were sent across the empire. But no one knew she was a Jew. No one knew God had just placed his servant in the palace, not to be served, but to stand in the gap for his people. Esther continued to live quietly in the king's house, still following the instructions of Mordecai, just as she had when he raised her as a child. Mordecai, meanwhile, spent his days at the king's gate. a place where the city's business was conducted and where royal officials and servants gathered. Though he was no nobleman, God had placed him there with purpose. One day, as Mordecai sat in his usual place, he overheard something chilling. Two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, who guarded the entrance to the palace, were speaking in hushed, angry tones. Their voices low but full of resentment, they plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. What they intended was treason, the murder of the most powerful man in the world. Mordecai didn't hesitate. He sent word immediately to Queen Esther, who now had direct access to the king. Esther relayed the warning to Xerxes, clearly stating that the information came from Mordecai. An investigation was launched. The matter was examined thoroughly, and the truth was uncovered. The two guards were guilty. They had indeed conspired against the king, and by Persian law, the punishment for such betrayal was swift and brutal. They were hanged on the gallows. The king's life was spared, but the moment passed without fanfare. Mordecai's role in exposing the plot was recorded in the Book of the Chronicles, a royal record of significant events kept in the king's presence. But strangely, no reward was given, no public honor, no recognition, no title, just a name in a book, quietly inked into the records of the empire.
By the way, if you find any of these videos interesting or enjoyable, please consider subscribing. These take a long time to make, and it really helps out.
After some time, King Xerxes promoted Haman the Agagite to the highest rank among his officials. All were ordered to bow to him, but Mordecai refused. Day after day, Haman saw his defiance and burned with anger. When he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman's hatred grew deeper. He didn't just want to punish Mordecai, he wanted to destroy all Jews throughout the empire. Haman cast lots, Purim, to choose the day. Then he approached the king with deceitful words.
There is a certain people scattered through your provinces. They live differently and don't follow your laws. It's not in your interest to tolerate them.
The king agreed, giving Haman his signet ring. A royal decree was sent to all 127 provinces. On the 13th day of the 12th month, every Jew, young and old, was to be killed. As the couriers spread the message, Susa fell into confusion. Mourning broke out among the Jews. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and wept bitterly in the streets of Susa. Across the empire, Jews fasted, mourned, and cried out as their destruction had been sealed. When Esther heard Mordecai was in mourning, she sent a messenger to him to find out why. Through the messenger, Mordecai urged her to go before the king and plead for her people. But Esther was afraid. She replied,
"No one may approach the king without being summoned. The penalty is death, unless he holds out the golden scepter. And I haven't been called for 30 days.
Mordecai's answer to the messenger was bold.
Do not think you will escape in the palace. If you stay silent, deliverance will come from somewhere else, but you and your family will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this."
Esther's fear gave way to faith. She replied,
Go, gather all the Jews in Susa, fast for me for 3 days. I will go to the king, even if it costs me my life. If I perish, I perish.
On the third day, dressed in her royal robes, Esther courageously entered the inner court of the palace. The king saw her standing there and extended the golden scepter toward her. With relief and hope, Esther touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked warmly, "What is your request, Queen Esther? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Esther replied,
If it pleases the king, come to a banquet I have prepared for you and Haman.
The king smiled, intrigued by her invitation, and readily agreed. And both he and Haman attended Esther's banquet. Yet, throughout the meal, Esther did not speak of her petition. Instead, she observed the king closely, her eyes searching for the right moment. Before the meal ended, Esther extended another invitation.
Please come again tomorrow, and then I will share my true request.
The king's interest deepened, and Haman's curiosity grew, both eager and uncertain about what Esther's plea might be. That night, King Xerxes lay awake, restless and troubled. Nothing could soothe his mind, not the royal wine, nor the comforts of his palace. Desperate for distraction, he ordered his servants to bring the book of the Chronicles, the official record of the kingdom's events. As the scribes read, the king's eyes caught a long-forgotten entry: Mordecai's name. The record told how Mordecai had uncovered a plot against the king's life, an act of loyalty that had saved Xerxes from assassination. But despite the gravity of this deed, Mordecai had never been rewarded. Deeply moved, Xerxes asked his advisors, what honor or recognition has been given to Mordecai for this? The advisor replied, nothing has been done for him. The king sat in thoughtful silence. How could such loyalty go unrewarded? At that very moment, Haman entered the palace, intending to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on a gallows he had built. But before he could speak, the king summoned him in. Haman, the king said, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Puffed up with arrogance, Haman imagined the king meant him. He responded with a detailed plan.
Let the man be clothed in the king's royal robes, which the king himself has worn. Let a royal crown be placed on his head, and let him be led on the king's own horse through the city streets. A noble official should ride before him, proclaiming, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.
The king smiled and said, go at once. Do everything you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything. Haman's face turned pale, his heart pounding with dread. He was forced to carry out the honor he had planned for himself, but instead it was given to his enemy. Humbled and bitter, Haman led Mordecai through the city streets, proclaiming his honor just as he had described. When he returned home, his spirit was crushed. He told his wife and friends everything that had happened, his anger and humiliation clear. They warned him, if Mordecai is of Jewish origin, you will not stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. And so Haman's plot to destroy the Jews grew darker, but his pride had already been wounded by the king's unexpected favor toward Mordecai. At the second banquet Esther had prepared, the king and Haman took their seats once again beside the queen. King Xerxes looked at her intently and asked once more, what is your request, Queen Esther? Speak, for your wish shall be granted, even to half the kingdom. With courage and conviction, Esther spoke her heart.
If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request.
The king's expression shifted, a flash of shock crossing his face. Esther continued,
For we have been sold, distressed, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. Had we merely been sold as slaves and servants, I would have kept silent, for no such distress would justify troubling the king.
The king's face darkened in shock and anger. He demanded, who is he, and where is the man who would dare do such a thing? Esther pointed to Haman, saying,
The adversary and enemy is this wicked man.
Enraged beyond measure, King Xerxes rose and left the banquet hall to cool his fury. Meanwhile, Haman was terrified. Seeing the king's anger and realizing his plot had been exposed, he rushed to beg Esther for mercy. In desperation, he fell on the couch where Esther was reclining. He clung to her, pleading for his life. At that moment, King Xerxes returned suddenly. He saw Haman clinging to Esther and shouted, Will he even assault the queen while I am in the house? The king's guards seized Haman, and he was swiftly led away and hanged on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Thus, The plans of the wicked were overturned in a single moment, and justice was served. After Haman was hanged, King Xerxes gave his entire estate to Queen Esther. She, in turn, appointed Mordecai over it. The king also removed his signet ring, once given to Haman, and placed it on Mordecai's hand, giving him royal authority. But the danger wasn't over. Though Haman was dead, his decree remained law. In Persia, a royal edict sealed with the king's ring could not be revoked, not even by the king himself. The day of destruction against the Jews still loomed on the calendar, the 13th day of the 12th month. So Esther once again approached the king. This time not for her life, but for the life of her people.
How can I bear to see disaster fall on my people?
She pleaded. King Xerxes granted permission for a new decree to be written, one that would counter the first. Mordecai quickly summoned the royal scribes and wrote in the king's name, "The Jews in every city have the right to assemble and defend themselves. They may destroy anyone who attacks them and take their enemies' goods if needed." This decree was sent out swiftly to all 127 provinces in every language, sealed with the king's ring. As it spread, hope was revived. Where there had been mourning, now there was light and gladness. On the appointed day, the Jews stood united across the empire. With royal protection and newfound courage, they rose up and defeated their enemies. In Susa, 800 attackers were struck down, including Haman's 10 sons, notorious men who had stood by their father's wicked plans, who were later hanged at Esther's request. Esther also asked for one more day of defense in Susa, and the king granted it. Across the empire, 75,000 enemies were defeated. Yet again, the Jews took no plunder. Their fight was for survival, not gain. It was not a day of greed. It was a day of justice. When the battle was over, the people rested, and what began as a day of dread became a day of victory and celebration. To remember their deliverance, the Jews established a yearly celebration called Purim, named after the lots Haman had cast to plan their destruction, now a symbol of God's reversal. Every year on the 14th and 15th of Adar, they would feast, rejoice, send gifts to one another, and give generously to the poor. A day that was once marked for death became a day of life. Mordecai was honored throughout the empire, clothed in royal blue and white, second only to King Xerxes. But it wasn't his power that made him great. It was his heart. He sought the good of his people and spoke peace and truth to all. And though God's name is never mentioned in the entire book of Esther, his fingerprints are everywhere. In every twist, every risk, every rescue. What was meant for destruction, God used for salvation. The story of Esther reminds us, even when God seems silent, he is never absent. Even when the odds are against us, he is already at work. Perhaps you too are where you are for such a time as this, not by accident, not unseen, but chosen, positioned, and called. Because the God who reversed the fate of a nation still writes stories of redemption today, and yours could be next.
If you haven't subscribed yet, please don't forget to do so. It really helps us continue providing you with amazing videos like this.